Definitely don't want that to happen. What's up everybody, it is Tristan over at Element Wheels, and today we're talking about the most controversial car modification that you could possibly ever do to your car or truck, a spacer.
What did he say?
I know, a spacer, right? That's what we're talking about today? Yes, because we get asked about them all the time. And there is such a negative stigma built up around spacers. Some people think they don't work, some people think they're dangerous. Well, I'm here to tell you about the different kinds of spacers that are offered, which ones are safest, and what's gonna work best for your application. Let's begin with why spacers are even a thing in the first place. Well, in our kind of end-all goal of the best fitment, we've come to terms that sometimes wheels or aftermarket wheels even that we purchase are not the right fitment, or they're a little bit weak, as in they sit inside the fender, right? The best fit, what we would consider the best fit, is your wheel and tire are gonna be as flush as possible with your fender. And sometimes in order to achieve that, you need to get something like a spacer because your wheels that you currently have are weak, either a higher offset or they're just maybe a factory wheel. And in that case, you get your spacer, that way you can fill that gap. And that's kind of where spacers started. And another really common use for spacers is a fixing issue. Say you buy a set of wheels and they're hitting your brakes, or they're rubbing the inside of the fender, or rubbing the rear of the fender. If that's a problem, a spacer can solve that. You push the wheel out, you'll no longer be hitting the brakes, you may no longer be rubbing. And then of course, there's always the adapter. And the adapter is used to maybe switch bolt pattern or push some wheels out super far if that's the aesthetic that you're looking for. So we talked about why spacers were kind of made in the first place, but why is it that people think so negatively about spacers?
Why?
I'll tell you. It all goes back to when these spacers first really became a thing. When they first became a thing, they were almost always universal and made of a low quality metal. If you take something that's universal and usually has a bunch of holes in it or a bunch of open space and not a lot of contact patch, mixed with a low quality metal, and then you throw it on a vehicle that's creating a ton of heat and friction as it flies down the freeway and usually weighs up to 10,000 pounds, then yes, you may see some issues with these type of spacers. And that's kind of where the stigma of spacers are bad began. But do not be fooled. This is not always the case. There are a ton of different spacer options, and I'm gonna tell you about why some spacer options are just fine, and a lot of them are a lot stronger than you actually think. Let us get into the different kinds of spacers. Well, let's start with the most commonly purchased spacer. This is the universal spacer. And just as it sounds, the universal spacer is made to be universal. It has a larger center bore size, so it can fit a variety of vehicles. It also has, a multitude of holes to fit a variety of bolt patterns. And this also tends to be the spacer that most people are worried about. And the reason being is, like we said, it tends to be the cheapest option. But that's why here at Element, we recommend up to a 10 millimeter for a universal spacer. After 10 millimeters, we would highly recommend going with the hub-centric or having a pair of hub-centrics built for your vehicle. Next up, we got the preferred spacer choice, or hub-centric spacers. So hub-centric spacers are designed to be hub-centric, meaning that the hub of the vehicle is going to mount up perfectly with the center of the spacer. And not only is the center bore of this machined perfectly, it's also going to be machined to the exact bolt pattern of your vehicle. And with this being a billet one-piece machined piece of aluminum, this can actually be made in any center bore, any bolt pattern, and any thickness. And this is gonna be so much stronger than a cast piece of metal. This is definitely the way to go. This is the preferred spacer option if you can do it. And finally, we got the good old adapter. The adapter bad boy. What is an adapter for? Well, honestly, they're kind of used for a variety of things. Adapters are meant to put a large amount of space in between the hub of your vehicle and your wheel. And usually that space is so great that you can no longer use your factory studs or lug bolts, so it has its own set. And in some instances, this is used to maybe change the bolt pattern if you're looking to put a set of wheels that maybe don't come in your bolt pattern, or vice versa. As well as if you're trying to maybe get your wheel to stick out 2 to 3 inches, then this is definitely the way to go. They're a little bit different because they bolt on, so they're actually going to mount to the vehicle, and then your wheel will actually mount on top of this. Now, you are taking the load of the vehicle and now putting it on a different set of bolts. So do take that into consideration whenever you're utilizing something like a bolt-on adapter. Just know that depending on the size, the weight of the vehicle, you do definitely want to take that into consideration because, like I said, you're taking some of the load off of the hub of the vehicle and now placing it on this spacer as well as these studs. So just keep that in mind. It's not a problem. Just like I said, depending on the size of the vehicle, the size of the spacer, it definitely is something to keep in mind. And I guess I should probably inform you about things to look out for, maybe pay attention to when you're purchasing some spacers. Well, when it comes to spacers, just kind of like I was saying earlier, universals are great if you get your wheels and you run into the issue of maybe it's not fitting just right, maybe it's just a frog's hair off.
Long hair like strands of skin and arteries when they breed. It is thought that the hairs allow them to take in more oxygen through their skin, while they take care of their...
It's just tapping that caliper. You run that nice small universal spacer to get you the proper fitment and you're back on the road. Nice, cheap, easy fix. But like I said, if it starts to get to the point where you're gonna be looking at something that's maybe over 10 millimeters, then at that point, I'd highly consider going with a hub-centric spacer, something that you can buy that is going to be that one piece billet aluminum. And hub-centric is one of those things that you can look online and you can find a variety of them that are available, but in some applications, maybe you have to have the custom set done. We do that as well. So if you're looking for any of that, just please reach out to us on that. And then of course, when it comes to adapters, like I had mentioned previously, you're gonna wanna take into the consideration of how far you're trying to push something out, as well as the weight of the vehicle that you're applying this to. That way, whenever you're installing the spacers that you're using, you're gonna make the best decision. Now, if you have maybe a race car or something like that, you're usually always gonna wanna do something like a hub-centric spacer. But believe me, I got universals on my drift car, that thing runs clean, so no problems at all if you do end up using that. I'm not saying that for any reason, if you buy any of these spacers, that you're never gonna have an issue. There's always the chance of a failure with any product at all on the road. So don't take that as advice as to say that none of these problems may occur with any of these types of spacers. I'm just hoping to clarify the differences between the spacers that are offered. That way, whenever you go to purchase a set of spacers, you make the best informed decision for yourself. Whenever you're using a spacer, depending on the size of the spacer, you're gonna shorten the distance of either your stud, or you're going to increase the distance between where your lug bolt goes through the wheel and actually mounts into your car. And if that's the case, then you're always gonna need to get the right amount of turns on your lug nut. And like I said, sometimes it gets so great that you maybe have to go with an adapter and that has its own set of studs. But right now we're just talking about spacers. And in the spacers instance, there's a couple solutions. If your vehicle has studs on it, like we've discussed previously, studs itself can be kind of solved in one of two ways. If your wheel takes it, you can use an ET lug nut or an extra thread lug nut that has an extended thread on the bottom that is actually meant to fit in the lug-centric pocket of the wheel. That way you can get a couple extra turns even if a spacer is added. The only other solution with a vehicle that has studs would be to replace the studs with a longer stud. That way you can get the proper amount of twist on your spacer. Now, it's a little bit easier if you drive a vehicle that requires lug bolts like a BMW, Audi, Mercedes. Any vehicle like that, it's a little bit easier. You just have to order a little bit longer lug bolt. Whatever distance that you're gonna be increasing, you just take that distance and you get a lug bolt that's maybe that much longer. That way you get the proper amount of torque on your vehicle. That way you don't run into the issue of a vibration or the wheel falling off because your wheel just isn't tightened enough. All right, let's clear the air regarding European cars or vehicles that require a lug bolt. Universal spacer, never gonna be a thing. We're tossing that. Only thing we're gonna use for a European car or a vehicle that requires a lug bolt is going to be a hub-centric spacer. So the real reason that we're not going to offer a universal spacer for a European vehicle or a vehicle that requires lug bolts is pretty simple. This universal spacer is not going to fit evenly on the hub of this vehicle. Therefore, your mounting surface is going to be uneven, which can give you vibrations. The only real solution to that, hub-centric. Hub-centric spacer is going to fit over the hub perfectly, line up with your lug holes properly. That way you can install your lug bolt. No issues down the road. Well. Closing out another video. Today's video, we talked about spacers, the different kinds of spacers that we offer, and which ones are gonna be kind of best suited for you. Now that we've kind of come to the conclusion of the video, hopefully whatever information I've given you today has pointed you in the right direction or helped you in making that decision for what kind of spacer or what style of spacer is best needed for you. If not, you know where to go. It's time. Go ahead, look in the description, give us a call, reach out to us, email us. You know where to find us. If not, please like and subscribe so we can continue doing this. And of course, hit that bell notification so you can get notified every time we post one of these videos so you can stay informed on what Element's got going on. Again, this is Tristan with Element Wheels. We will see you guys again.